Thank you for coming and welcome. It's Sunday, so it's the last day of the week, and for some of us, a pretty good week. Maybe that will come up, I think, in some ways in terms of the theme. Yeah, because I wanted to spend all day Wednesday on the inauguration, which I did. And so I want to pick up the theme that I had put down for that. And that is continuing with our tool of resistance to nourishing change, but seeing how passive listening is so important in addressing our resistance to nourishing change, giving it an awareness of it, and giving us a chance to change it. And I think with both resistance to, when I bring resistance to nourishing change and passive listening together, there's no question it gets at, I think, is the hardest stuff in Pelham training. We all have things we need to listen to and don't and won't and can't, or whatever. And we all have reasons why not, and reasons why, we won't passive listen in this particular moment. Although I'm a good passive listener, but I just can't passive listen to you now. That is almost always one of the tip-offs to resistance to nourishing change. Resistance to nourishing change has got some odd qualities to it. One of them is, and this comes into the Pelham concept and David's concept of what he calls self-identity. And our self-identity is that part of us that we can only know through the perceptions of other people. And in a way, I sort of took that concept and sort of used it to stimulate a number of different things. And self-identity and resistance to nourishing change are very, very closely linked. And it is often the case that when we get feedback that is about our self-identity, and it's about particular quirks or characteristics we have in the way we communicate with people, the way we connect with people. And there's something about the way we turn people off. And it could be something quite smallish. Someone has a nervous laugh that keeps sort of coming in on almost any serious interaction, or someone else talks too much or talks too little. And those moments of getting feedback about that part of ourselves that other people see and that turns them off is almost always a sort of royal road to major work we have to do. Freud called dreams the royal road to the unconscious. I guess I'd call feedback about our self-identity, Royal Road to Change, Nourishing Change. So the concept of resistance to nourishing change is really sort of deep and subtle, and so often we've just got agitated and stubborn resistance to passive listening to someone saying something to us that is about the part of our self-identity that we don't want to look at. And yet on another level, and this is where it's genuinely complex, we sort of know. We've heard it before and we know it, okay? And it surprised me how that sort of Royal Road is there. I didn't know that at the beginning. I thought, listening to people's feedback about our self-identity was quite separate from, the deep work we have to do. But what I found over time is not, they're really connected, absolutely. And it's one of those things that, one of the hard parts of resistance to nourishing change, and also, receiving feedback about our self-identity, almost on one level, we're shocked and we feel embarrassed, misunderstood. You don't, there's a whole litany of things we go through when we won't passive listen to feedback. Not this time, you don't understand me, you've got your own agenda in this situation. A whole bunch of sort of almost classic things we go through. I think there's and I think, the whole, this is making today pretty dense. So I'll pull back in a minute and provide some simplicity. But it's very much related to calluses and how we have attraction to hurt, and then we callous to the way we hurt ourselves and hurt other people. And then we develop justification for the calluses. And we end up not wanting to hear that which we really do need to hear. And, as I've said here recently, this part of the work was much more sort of present when we had long programs. Working with people over 3 or 4 years, then part-time training course or 5 years, or working with people on 3 to 6 months residential programs. And resistance to nourishing change and the parts of ourselves that we need to change and don't want to look at would always come up in those settings, always. And it's less so when our contact with people in the programs is not that lengthy or intensive. But the reason I put that in, I used to say, and I really believe it, some people will, lose their marriage, lose their fortune, leave a program before they'll look at their resistance to nourishing change. And I knew that. Both Fritz Perls and David Pellin had other ways of talking about this. The way Fritz said it, I can't quite remember, it's a long time ago, a long time since I revisited this part. Yeah, I know what. Fritz used to say, some people, in his heavy German accent, some people come the long way to prove you have nothing to offer, okay? And, you know, he was talking about a long way, like, you know, across the oceans or something. People will come the long way to prove you have nothing to offer. If those people are in my program, I will throw them out. And he did. Not very often. David had another way of looking at it, and he talked about Mr. Ray and Mr. B, and Mr. B would go to great lengths to prove you have nothing to offer, okay? And, you know, when I was young and bushy-tailed and, you know, setting things up and full of confidence, I thought they were just both wrong. I thought, you know, that's not true. People won't go to all that distance just to prove you have nothing to offer. I learned they were absolutely right. Some people will do that. And, you know, it just creates great difficulties. Because in a way they're there and they don't want to be there, and they've signed up for this, you know, long program. And that was a background to developing resistance to nourishing change. And I used to be sort of stronger about it than I am now, that some people will pursue, you know, destructive paths rather than face their resistance to nourishing change. And then I guess I probably this time expanded out and said, well, you know, that's the human condition. So, any question? Let me ask you to come in there, because I know I'm throwing out a lot of pretty heavy stuff right now.
I have something floating around that I wonder about, which is, you know, there's that East meets West, and I mean, whether it's like a meditative practice or psychoanalysis. I mean, not psychoanalysis is, but yeah, of breaking down the ego, defenses and identity. When people started, I know that you think along the terms of that you have to you need to have ego strength before you can deconstruct. So it's not, I don't think it's a question. I'm just wondering if in the Palin work or the Gestalt, if there's asking the question of how solidly put together this person is. Are they stuck because they're overly invested in their ego identity, or are they not strong enough to drop what identification defenses they have to begin with, which is not enough to begin with?
Yeah, no, that it's a great question, and that is sort of really central. How Dave and I, and then Fritz, tackled that question. Okay, Dave was adamant. He said you don't take away anything until you've got something, put something back. Okay.
Right.
And you better be aware of that. Now, he did not in any way call himself a therapist or a psychotherapist, but on that point, you know, if people have got their defenses, or if they've got their addictions, or if they've got their institutionalization, good institutionalization or bad institutionalization. You know, you don't take those things away unless you've got something significant to put in its place. And that's one of the places where I'm so supportive of AA, because they do that. They put something back. Pardon me. That's where I come. Yeah, Cynthia.
Well, I don't know if I just wanted to sort of get myself in the line, but, and maybe this is part of this, but my question is, how do you know as a person whether when you're feeling something like resistance, because there have been times when I've been resistant and I fought and I felt really bad, and it turns out the thing that I was resisting was actually not good for me. You know, that there's that how do you know whether it's sort of your own judgment being able to sense what's good for you and what's not good for you, or whether or not it's resistance to nourishing change? Maybe that's part of that whole answer.
I think it's advisors on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's I don't have it in front of me, and I've got to be honest, I haven't revisited in some decades, but there is a whole checklist in the manual about resistance to nourishing change, that these are the things you are looking for, okay? Now, that was written from the point of view of training therapists, okay? And what the approach there is, you've got to have, you know, you've got to have a bunch of these coming up, not just one, right? So that's sort of one way of answering your questions. And some of those things were someone accepting the willingness, no, someone accepting the need to change, that's one. Another one is, which I mentioned last time, someone coming up with, everything's about this other minor issue. The fundamental issue is not addressed. Someone not being able to try small steps, not being willing to do that. Someone in a therapeutic setting, one of the ways it comes up in a therapeutic setting, I think there'd be something equivalent in other settings, and I just learned this was just sort of experience, okay? Someone who wants to sort of ask you all the questions about what is your background and how can this help and how does this relate to this or relate to something else, and not addressing their issues. That was another sort of checkpoint. So after a time, particularly in a residential, intense residential setting, or an intense setting of a group being together for 3 or 4 years, you're sort of going through that, and you know, a whole bunch of things have to sort of check out. Mary, does that make sense? So, and just staying with this one
Yes,
question
I think so.
for a moment. The other thing, of course, is advisors, okay? You know, I hate this, or I've got doubts about him, or, you know, is it just me, or, you know, I'm trying and failing all the time. Maybe I'm working in the wrong room, or whatever. And an advisor can come in and say, no, that's not good for you. Or, you know, this could be good for you and you're not giving it a right shot. And that's where the theme of this session comes in, being able to passive listen to someone saying that to them. And it might be as simple as, you know, I think you're in the wrong job. Or I think you're in the wrong marriage. I mean, that's big stuff. Just for a moment, Mary, going back, just to finish it up, going back to Tamara's point, I felt that was something around which Gestalt therapy was quite weak, okay? And the whole, what you could do is break people down. And I don't know, because I studied with him a little bit and then he died. I studied with Janet Letterman. I don't know what it would have been like. I've often thought it could have gone wrong if I'd studied with Fritz long term, because the whole thing about breaking people down and don't push the river. And I said to him at one point, he didn't like it. I'm working with people who, if they don't push the river, they'll drown. Don't push the river is on the assumption you've got a secure place in society, and probably in a family, and the river is going to take you to a good place. Don't push it. I'm working with people, the river is going to take you back to prison, okay? So I think there's something about Fritz and working with that successful, established, secure client base. I think whatever our seminal client base is endlessly affects our work. Mine was prisons and their families. Mine was about how breaking the law affects individuals and families and communities. That was my seminal base. So I developed small steps and stuff. And I wrote a paper once. This was when I was, I don't know, I look back at my radical days with some nostalgia perhaps. But I wrote a paper called Therapy is Rape. Because, what you do is take control, strip someone naked, and tell them what to do. And I just thought that, and then I wrote another paper saying it's like, it's old-fashioned because it's almost based on, some of that therapy is almost based on sort of Victorian values. Spare the rod and spoil the child, go soft on the client and you're accused of feeding him chicken soup, which is poison. Because Fritz's paper was chicken soup is poison and my paper was therapy is rape. What's wrong with, you couldn't use the word help, you're in trouble. I even said, well, isn't it the case that someone says, well, I'm really having difficulties, and we say, well, I think this guy Fritz Perls could help you. That's a whole lot of the start of my thing about not wanting to use professional language, and had a whole thing. I was determined to bring the word help back into the therapeutic field, where it was not accepted, it was unethical to say you could help somebody. And I just thought it was bonkers. So that question you ask underlies a whole lot of those things. Mary, sorry. Oh, maybe Mary stepped away for a minute.
She had to go move to the car, I think.
Yeah.
She wrote that in the chat.
So the material I'm presenting now, if the forum was, say, 16 people and, a number of people coming and going a bit, which would be fun if it was that. I don't think I'd be teaching this material. I'd be staying with other stuff. I would for sure. This can be hard. This can be hard.
I don't quite understand this whole thing about what was wrong with helping people. Isn't that why you went to see somebody to help you?
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand this whole concept that it was unethical to say that you could help somebody, because isn't that why you would go to a therapist, would be to help you?
Oh my God.
What a naive question.
I am not here. All I can do is facilitate and bring out all the answers that you have inside you, and no, I can facilitate that. I do not claim to be able to help you. I mean, to me, it was just nonsense, okay? But it became absolute. It's still there. It's still there. It's still a criticism of me. Well,
Can I say something here?
yeah.
I'm struck by, like in that tone of voice that you're using to express that old view, I'm struck by the clear absence of compassion in it and the judgment, the power holding. Because I was thinking a minute ago when you were talking about it, I thought, oh yeah, that's when therapists were invested, or I don't know, maybe they still are. Yeah, they still are a lot invested in keeping the power in the relationship, and because in a way, I had a client once a very long time ago, a very sort of conservative, conventional man, and he had some stress and had a bit of a breakdown or something. And you know, I forget how I was working with him, but I knew that he couldn't. He had that conventional thing that he was expecting. He'd ask questions and I'd have answers, and he'd understand the answers, and he'd go away, and that, you know. But it's like, so that degree, it's like, well, I haven't actually got the answer. You know, I literally the words. I guess what I'm coming up with sometimes the words that you were just miming, you know, copying just then. There's nothing wrong with those words. It's like, because why I've suddenly thought of him. I know there was some particular session, and I knew at the time something a bit magical had happened. Can't remember now what, but suddenly at the end, he saw it. He suddenly said, "Oh, I've got all the answers, haven't I?" I'm like, "Yes." That's the point, because it was really a big penny that had to drop with him, you know, to stop this sort of. I want to say patriarchal model, but he was the man. But I guess he was perceiving me as the expert, even though I must have been a lot younger than him, I think. And he was wearing a grey suit and a tie and all that. And anyway, so it's about the compassion. Oh, I know what, and intent. So there's the caring life force, caring, you know, compassion, and in the intent to empower, I think. So it's sounding like, you know, that old view of, oh, you've got to break the person down. It's like, it's just horrible. It's it's power. It's an abuse of power, isn't it? I remember, I don't know if you remember, Peter, you once saying to me a long, long time ago, if I'd ever had one session with Fritz Perls, it would have taken me 2 years to get over it. Do you remember saying that?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
I do.
And I'm getting what I understand what you mean. Yeah, it's like, I've had that already. I already know unyielding. I know absence of love. What would be the point in me coming to another environment with absence of love, absence of holding? It's about holding, isn't it? It's about compassionate holding.
And while I said that at that time to you, and that must be like the 32, 34 years ago, you know, sort of assessing his career, okay, Pearl's career, it wouldn't have happened, okay, because the session wouldn't have happened, right?
Because I wouldn't have gone to him, you mean?
Because he would have been clear enough about who he was that you would not have gone to him. Yeah. So, since he attracted the people who could work with his parameters, okay? which looking back on them were antiquated, patriarchal, sexist, racist, and you know, lurking around underneath. Yeah, so I think around him there was a certain sort of unconscious selecting people in and out. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so the people who he could have damaged didn't turn up, but the people
because he was sort of overt about it, so
yes,
you would know.
yes,
So I
yes,
would have picked up, right, I was already surviving in the Metropolitan Police Force at the time. The last thing I'd have needed was to go to some so-called therapeutic environment that was also
his harshness, you know, his harshness, you could say his nastiness, which of course, as you know, he carried survivor's guilt. He was extraordinarily perceptive, and he saw coming what was going to happen in Germany when he pleaded with family and friends to leave as he was going to leave. And they wouldn't. They said, no, it's going to be okay. We're really established here. You know, we've got wealth, we've got social and professional position. And he said, no, it's not going to work out that way. Anyway, he left, went to South Africa, did really well. And they went to the camps and didn't survive. And I don't think he ever got over his, you know, the phrase now is survivor's guilt, isn't it? I don't think he ever got over that. And then, you know, it made him at times sort of nasty. I was in the room when he got a phone call. Someone said to him, Fritz, you got a call from New York. And he said, okay. And someone said, the person said, we only heard one side of the conversation, but I guess afterwards we learned the rest of it. And this person, it's someone who I think now is quite famous, and said, you know, I'd really like to study with you. You know, I live in New York. I'd like to come to Vancouver and study with you if you'd accept me. And he said, who are you? And she said who she was. And she said, I'm the first woman rabbi in the country. And he said, so call me back when you have given up your crutch, okay? You know, just out of it. You know, he couldn't stand people having a purpose. So it wasn't his, which is not an odd position for him to take. You know, you couldn't be a devout and successful Jew and study with Fritz Perls if you didn't give up a certain attachment to your church. So, and that was the end. That was towards the end of his life. Okay, you know, so in some ways I saw him I guess I saw him at both his best and his worst. That's probably an honest way to say it. And I think he was really scared of death and took a lot of risks towards the end of his life. And it was that background that I made that statement to you, Nikki. But somehow or other, he didn't harm people. You know, he moved them away from him or made himself unattractive to them. But my God, people he trained harmed people. People who tried to do the things he did caused suicide. I know that.
Sorry. The people he trained, what?
They
harmed people
because they were trying to do what he did without his innate skills. I don't think Fritz, for all his fame and risk-taking and creativity and going through a time of sort of being adored, I don't think he ever lost touch with his caring life force and his doubts that come with a caring life force. So in a way, he was safe. Other people took off on the vanity trip. And then as Tamara was saying, you know, what you got to do is break people down. you know, okay, someone who's very successful, you know, academic with, you know, home in New York and home in the Bronx and another one in the Hamptons, and you know, a bit sort of uptight because of all the inherited success or achieved success. Yeah, you know, breaking down some of those barriers might be useful. Doing the same thing with people who are vulnerable wasn't. So, and just to keep filling that in, he had evaluation in terms of hurt and purpose. He had it sort of naturally or intuitively or however we say it. And it was in his bones. And by the time I'd met him, you know, he had been practicing his chosen profession for something like 50 years. You know, so he'd seen everything, he was subtle and all of that. You know, these people who came along and sort of, well, to be frank, fell in love with the fame and wanted some of it. They didn't have that background. But it wasn't that. I think even more than some others, he never lost sight of what we call the caring life force. He never lost sight of that. Yeah, Cynthia.
Well, I'm listening to all of this and I'm thinking about sort of the question I had, and I think I may have somehow through this had a light bulb flash about that maybe some of the ways to sense is sort of like with the 7 levels of listening in terms of putting the just sort of letting things sit and putting evaluation as to whether or not this is right or wrong until you've had time to, you know, not necessarily trust your knee-jerk reaction that, oh no, this is, but sit and think about it and look at it and stuff like that, and then make a decision about that. And if it's a knee-jerk, it's probably resistance, but if it's a considered opinion, it might not be. I don't know that, but that flash just came to my head, which you're talking about all the different.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I'm sorry if I go a bit too much into history, but Mary.
Well, I just, because Cynthia's re-raised it, I just wanted to make the point that I made in the chat, which was that knowing Cynthia, I felt that, knowing, having talked over years, her initial question about, you know, can't remember the initial question. I didn't remember what I was
You're freezing.
thinking.
You're
but
freezing
I
and
was
coming in and out.
I can't do much about that now. I'm in the car.
Maybe you could try turning off your video.
So
audio works better if you turn off the video.
Oh yeah, thank you. Forgot
Sure.
that.
Okay.
Wait, here, stop video. Yeah. So that in the ordinary world, people can, when they give you feedback, it's often undiluted criticism without necessarily having goodwill behind it. And in the Pellin setting, it's structured, as you pointed out, often over long periods. There's goodwill towards each other in the background. And so even though it can feel critical, and because it's something we don't want to hear right then, it has a nourishing intent, and that's not necessarily true in the outside world. That's where I felt Cynthia's initial confusion might be about that.
Yeah, I'd say that going back, I planned this session very clearly, and then I've gone off in a completely different direction what I planned. Okay, but going back to resistance, nourishing change, and passive listening, there are a couple of examples about that, and I guess this is where I'd sort of disagree slightly with you, Mary. I think you do get this in the ordinary world. I don't think it's special to Pelham. And I think you get it, you know, a metaphor of a nourishing family. I think you get this in a nourishing family. And, you know, whether the child's sort of 6 or 9 or 13, in a nourishing family, mum and dad will say to each other, well, Pete sort of said he wanted that. Or, Pete said he likes his new friend, or whatever. And I think within a nourishing family, there is very significant moments of what we call passive listening. And I think it often comes out like that. Well, you know, she really talks about it a lot. Or, you know, she seems to be really interested in it. Or, you know, she says her friends say he's a nice boy. Or, you know, whatever comes out. But there will be that sort of moment of almost stepping back, because parents are absolutely programmed, okay? We can't stop giving advice, okay, in our genes. You're going to go out wearing that skirt, my girl, or whatever. You know, we can't stop. Particularly when they're teenagers. And I guess there's a reason for that. You know, it's a pretty scary world out there for teenage boys and girls. But there will be, in significant time, you know, the parents will sort of, I would say, step back from emotional reaction and evaluation, 5 and 6, and even 7, because parents have a sort of heightened awareness of when their kids don't want to listen to anything they say at all, which is goodwill in a way, and sort of go back into, you know, there's something the way she said, and we'll go into passive listening, we'll go into content and obvious, we'll go into those levels of listening. And the other example, one of my current inspirations, I don't know how much, okay? I don't know how much he's going to be a model for me. But everyone knew the thing Joe Biden couldn't do was keep his mouth shut. And everyone was scared about it. During the campaign, you know, he'll make one gaffe and he'll blow it. You know, he has listened to passive listened to hard feedback. He has changed over that. And I think if he made a gap now, everyone would be pleased, because, you know, he's almost becoming a bit, you know, wooden and controlled. But, you know, he's absolutely, and the thing I didn't know, and a friend of mine who, you know, is an American, knows a lot about American politics, I didn't know this, and I can't remember the name offhand, sorry, but I can't get the wrong name out of my head, but the Judiciary Committee hearing for Justice Thomas, what was her name? What was the woman's name who put in their sexual harassment complaint?
Anita Hill?
Yes, thank you, Anita Hill. I couldn't
What?
get Rosa Parks out of my head, you know. Yeah, and it's a bit like that, Anita Hill, you know, short names. Yeah, Anita Hill, you know, it was an awful moment. And he changed after that. It seems it's quite sort of established. He never handled it very well. He's never really apologized. But it seemed people who know him knew he blew it, and he was different after that. I didn't know that. So, you know, from the new president of the United States to, you know, ordinary parents who are doing a good job, there is this passive listening. There is this passive listening type feedback. And it works. So
Can I just say, I didn't mean to say that it didn't, they're very helpful examples. I didn't mean to say that the nourishing feedback didn't happen in other circumstances. I meant more in relation to what Cynthia initially said, that some people can just kind of lay into you and say, say they're doing it for your own good, and it's not always wise to take it all on board, although of course you can.
That's why you're absolutely right. And that's why I bring up the thing about parents of teenagers, but, you know, can't resist giving advice. And that's where in the material on evaluation strata and advisors, we make a really clear distinction between an advisor and an advice giver. And over the years, when I've been an advice giver who is someone who comes in and, you know, has to give their 2 cents worth. And an advisor is someone we invite in. I guess an advice giver is someone who invites themselves in. And that's where when I'm teaching that over the years, I've used the example of how parents of teenagers cannot resist being advice givers. Okay, they've got to, they can't stop. And one of my pitches about passive listening over the years has been passive listen to your teenage kids and see how they respond. Yeah, but Dad, you haven't said anything. No, I'm just listening to you. Teenagers love it. Changes relationships. But parents are absolutely programmed. You've got to come in, you've got to come in, you've got to come in. And then I guess is finding the examples where we, and perhaps the everyday examples where we you know, that give us a sort of background to selling passive listening and how powerful it can be. Tomorrow.
Feels like a good tool to teach a worker or client to passive listen to a therapist, but for the gut part that you're talking, I think that you were mentioning, Cynthia, how do you know to follow your gut when the feedback? I think that it's assessing for evaluating for the goodwill of a therapist, but that the same as being, you know, a kid with parents, there's so much room for error. If there is the understanding of goodwill, then you can really blow it magnificently again and again. I'm as a therapist, and there's no harm done.
No, that's absolutely true. And I think that's where, I guess in Pelham, there's almost a slightly unwritten contract. As a therapist, I'll passive listen to you. And as a worker, you'll passive listen to me. But I will passive listen to what you're saying as well. And I think in the nourishing family, when the children know that mum or dad will say when they made a mistake, mum or dad will say when they were wrong. And that's where our whole concept of transparency, and, you know, he did it. I mean, and I mean, you can imagine how obsessive I was on Wednesday and Thursday. I don't think I need to describe it. And you know, to me, this is a total aside, but A Star Was Born. You know, it was like a Broadway, one of those old Broadway films about Broadway. You know, when a star is born, a young person comes up and bang, they're a star. She's a star. You know, she's a worldwide star.
I know the school in Santa Monica that Amanda Gorman went to. It's kind of
Wow.
cool having that local connection.
Oh, that's gorgeous.
Yeah.
That's gorgeous. But she is the classic Broadway Star is Born. She really is. Even all the color of it, her color was almost like the color of an old MGM musical. It was sort of over vivid in the way back. But to me, you know, the caring life force, I was sort of amazed. I didn't believe it the first time I heard him say it. But it was the moment when he's virtually swearing in these 1,000 appointments, these people who've been appointed for these jobs. And he said, you know, if you're working for me, because he talked first about how his father said, you know, everyone deserves respect, everybody. So he put that down, and then he said, if you're working for me and I find that you are not respecting the people you're working with and the people who are working under you, I will fire you. I will fire you on the spot. I mean, it sent a chill down my spine. I mean, you know, someone coming in saying, I believe in the caring life force, you know, holding up a placard. You know, we can have caring life force street demonstrations. I just saw amazing he said that. And he, you know, he didn't stumble. And then the next thing, because that was a heavy statement, that's about, you know, I'll fire you if you act that way. And then he said, I will make mistakes. When I make mistakes, I will tell you, and I will need you to help me, but I will make mistakes. And that's all sort of caring life force stuff, wrapped up in a very polished, sophisticated, who knows how much preparation goes into any single word he says, but, you know, wrapped up in a whole lot of performance life force, material life force. But, you know, it's there. It's absolutely there. It's sort of, I don't know, proving our point, Mary.
Can I just say, I didn't see much of the inauguration. I forget what I was doing, but I saw some of the parade along the street to the White House, and it makes me tearful. There was such a touching moment when you saw two kids standing at the barrier, and it looked like a magnet, like he had to go over and acknowledge them personally in the middle of this important work. It was very touching.
Yeah, if you read sort of the small print, which everyone said about him, you know, he comes through as very, very genuine, very, very genuine. Anyway, that's and he is, I reckon his sister, that's my guess, is the one who insists that he passive listens. That's my guess. But he changed his behavior. Absolutely. And that's what's possible with passive resistance to hard feedback. And I guess with the sort of whole Pelin approach and the way I want to take the Pelham approach forward is finding those sort of general examples and really searching for them, looking for them, finding the examples that are outside of the therapeutic world, even outside of the people work world.
I've thought of another one, Peter.
Yeah, Mary.
You remember that I talked about the blue ocean strategy. So it's like it's a special category within the business world, but their little paper on how to help companies be more successful is specifically based on each level of management listening to the feedback of the level beneath them that they're managing about things like whether the management are micromanaging, you know, whether they're being given respect and responsibility, can measure it with the scale they're working at. So the whole model of turning a company around is based on listening to feedback from the people below you.
Yeah, yeah. Amazon have an example of that because my son works for Amazon, worked for Audible. He's done doing very well there. And I can't remember what it's called, but they have a sort of procedure, okay, procedure or policy. And everyone knows it. It's something like 1UP. And what it means, you always have a right to go to the person above your boss. You always have a right, you know, to go to your boss's boss. And it's just totally in the company. Everyone says, oh, and I think it's so much in the company that people, I don't get the feeling people sort of exploit it or blackmail someone with it, although it's human nature. There will be, you know, whatever. But it's just this ordinary thing. And I think that covers some of what you're saying, Mary, about, so that is the senior person listening to the junior person and it not being filtered through a management stream. And people who work for Amazon say it's just great. You know, they always know that, they always know it's there. I must talk to Gabe a bit more about it. He's only mentioned it, you know, because he shared with me something that was going horrible at work and he was able to do this or that or that. But it'd be interesting to talk to him about it almost on a theoretical level. Yeah. And because one of the things I feel we have with both passive listening and resistance to nourishing change, less so with resistance to nourishing change. So we have to spend more time on that. And that is the precision of our tools. Okay, that, you know, my belief in the Pelham tools is that they are practical and they provide precision, real precision. I think we've got that in passive listening. I think we can sort of learn how to know when we're not doing it. Because passive listening over and over again is being an empty vessel and letting it in. I mean, if we are assessing some feedback we're getting while we're getting it, whether or not it's useful or not, we're not passive listening. You know, passive listening is literally, yeah, if someone's meditating and they're, you know, sort of assessing the usefulness of the meditation while they're doing the meditation, you know, it's not meditation anymore. So, you know, passive listening is, so if we can really get in, am I being in an empty vessel? Am I not reacting internally or externally? If I am reacting internally, externally, there's nothing wrong with that. Except I need to know I'm not passive listening, I'm doing something else. how I think it's easier in some ways in terms of, what I'm calling precision, to know when we've got attraction to hurt going on, because attraction to hurt, the destructive side of the hurtful side of attraction to hurt, is when there's a certain self-indulgence in it. Okay. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, as long as we can have the precision of saying, okay, that's my attraction to hurt. I've got an awareness of that. What are the consequences of?
Peter, I don't quite understand that. Do you mean when you kind of let in something too much and you're kind of feeling your own faults in along with the person's feedback? Is that what you meant, or something different?
No, thank you for bringing that up. I wasn't making that point, but I think that point's crucial and I'd forgotten to. So thank you. Yeah, the downside of passive listening is when we must not do it, and it goes back to Tamara's point earlier. If we're at a very vulnerable time, we don't want to passive listen to anybody unless it's someone who we know we can trust, know who cares about us, and that person's feedback, even that person's feedback, if we're in a vulnerable time, will be positive, positive, positive. They're not going to give the other stuff. It's like in Pelham work at times we do around just getting support, just getting support and nothing else. So trying to make this clearer. So yeah, I do want to cover that point, which I have forgotten to. So I really appreciate you bringing it up, Mary. There are times not to passive listen. Absolutely, there are times not to do that, not to go there. And if someone won't go along with that, won't go along with me protecting myself because I need to protect myself at this time, then somehow or other they're the wrong person. You can't insist someone passive listens. It's not in the Pelham methodology. I want you to passive listen to this. That's nowhere in Pelham. That's often misunderstood. I don't say it enough. Passive listening is something we choose to do when it's about us. And we've got the right not to do it. So if someone is doing some Pelham work and they're getting feedback and they decide, I'm not going to listen to this feedback, not tell anyone, but just decide that. That's fine. The worker, the client is in control, not the practitioner. We set up the formats, we set up the structures, but there's not a statement that because I'm the founder of the Pelham Institute. I set up the structures and I set up the theory. But that doesn't mean I can tell you what to do. That doesn't mean I've got control. And I think that goes back to your point earlier, Tamara. I have the right to take your ego strength away from you because I think that will be good for you. We don't go there. Okay, we do not go there. So trying to, I would like to keep it sort of undefined at the moment. How do we have real clarity about resistance to nourishing change? I think that's something we can look at again on Wednesday or over time. I don't think I want to come in and say, well, it's this and this. But I think it's it's very complex and subtle. That's why I would like to ask people to read the paper that's in the manual. Okay, I can't remember which chapter. Because I knew when I developed it, this has got to be, and that was exactly the same time as I was developing the safety stuff, okay? Exactly the same time. And that was a time when there were endless risks being taken in the therapeutic field. And I thought when I developed resistance to nourishing change, yeah, there's something good here, but we got to be clear that's what it is. You know, it's not something that we can sort of bang as a label on someone all over the place. And that's why I developed that checklist. And I remember having it clear. It's not good enough to have one or two. You've got to have a whole bunch of them, okay, before you can see that. And then we taught it theoretically, okay? We taught it theoretically before we used it. This was in the very, very early years of Palin. So when it was referred to, people already knew this bit of Palin theory.
Peter, I just want to let you and everyone know that I put the page numbers in the last two newsletters.
Oh, thank you very much.
That you're referring to.
Yeah, thank you. I think we can expand it because I've always had a sense of how attraction to hurt, you know, because early days when I was teaching attraction to hurt, and I teach about how, you know, we can't know our own attraction to hurt. We can hardly ever find it on our own. We need other people to notice it, and we will, you know, resist facing it. And then I use the example then of nations. You know, England can't quite get its head around about, this was way back, you know, this is 70. England can't get its head around how the class system permeates everything. Other people can see it, but England can't see it. And at that time, I'd say America can't see how it seems greedy in how much it's sort of consuming and owning so much of the world's resources. It's very hard to see that from the inside. The rest of the world can see very, very easily. Yeah, Cynthia.
I seem to be getting, and this is rare, but I'm getting more and more confused the more this session is going on, you know, and I'm thinking of this from, I mean, I'm not a therapist, you know, as an astrologer, I'm doing something very different. You know, I'm looking at the planets, I'm looking at what's going on, and I'm just doing my thing. And, you know, clients can take it or not take it as, I mean, I'm not working with them on, generally, sometimes I have repeat. Actually, I do have some repeat, but it's not like something. So I'm looking at somebody who, you know, and I know a big area I have for resistance, and trying to get through my own resistance and trying to think about, well, is it time? Is it, because I also have a high perseverance strata too. And I have, you know, somebody suggested something, somebody even who had very good, you know, who I knew cared about me and had good ideas, and I just would keep going and going and going. And, you know, and sometimes I got smarter at a certain point and saying, you know, one time I was, you know, I think this is hurting me. I said, well, stop. But, you know, so how do you, and also sometimes with resistance, sometimes it's because it's just not the time. I mean, I'm thinking about like in 12-step groups, you know, and all the steps, there's like a getting ready to make the change step before you actually make the change. You know, that there's, and there's also sometimes I've noticed, like when I've made changes, I've been resistant to it years ago, but then I remember, I'm like, oh, okay. You know, I mean, I think it's, I don't know. It just seems like there's a whole lot of nuance, and there's a whole lot of um and maybe and like with passive listening, it's I I mean, for me, it's hard to passive listen without just accepting everything somebody says, which I've been reading is not really passive listening either, because you're deciding it's good as well as deciding it's bad. um like one thing I had, sorry, I'm a little tangenty, but I'm confused, which is probably why. But I had an idea of sort of like passive listening and sort of put what I hear in a little box, and so to look through and to unpack later, and to not necessarily have to sort of take it all in to all of me, and just sort of putting it in a little box and then looking at that. But I don't know if that was sort of my own conception, but I don't
No,
know if that has validity.
I mean, I think the confusion's a good idea, okay? I'm not saying that in the sense of if my teaching is not clear, that's a good idea. But I think the confusion is a good idea. And coming to the point about passive listening is really subtle, okay? And what I've found, we all do it in different ways, okay? So your way of putting it in a box, my way is sort of holding on to a sentence and a name, okay? That's my way of doing passive listening. And I guess because it's my way of doing passive listening, that's the way I teach it, right?
Sorry, excuse, I didn't hear what you said, but your way for passive listening.
My way of passive listening, that bit?
Yeah.
My way of passive listening is a sentence and a name. The person who said it the name of the person who said it to me and what they said to me. That's the way that passive listening works for me.
A sentence.
Pardon? A sentence. Yeah, one sentence and the person who said it. Yeah. And I could give examples, and I'll see quite a few examples of that. Other people do it in different ways, you know. And if you do it with, the slips of paper in the box, that's great.
Oh, I haven't decided on doing that. I'm just trying. I haven't tried doing it. This is sort of like I'm trying to understand how to do this. Like even when you're saying a thing in people's names, my thing is that whether or not it's, I mean, because I do it naturally. I mean, I can repeat. In fact, when I was in school, taking notes was actually a problem for my memory, because I could sort of play back what happened, where it happened, where the teacher was standing, and if I was taking note, that my memory is not as good as it was when I was in my 20s and 30s. I can't do that anymore. I have to take notes. But at that time I could do that. And and there's some things that I do want to have repeat through my head like a tape recorder, and some things I probably don't. I mean, I've had to spend, and I guess what I'm trying to think is if you're passive listening, how do you do it without I have a tendency, if an authority tells me to do something, my natural sense is I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And particularly, but not just an authority, somebody I respect, I care about. And that sometimes gets me into trouble, because what they said, and maybe there's an attraction to hurt, because I'm far more likely, the critical things that people said are far more likely to stick than praise. Praise I kind of throw out. But so my, especially if you're dealing with resistance and hard feedback and questioning your own judgment, I think I need something, not, and this is, I know there's a theoretical, and all you're talking about Fritz Perls and all this other stuff and tearing people down. I'm like, gosh, I didn't know that this really happened. I mean, I sort of sensed it at times, but this is not my field. I mean, I was a lawyer and a teacher, and it's a very different way of looking at things. but I guess I need something. I don't know, something kind of like a sort of, and I did read the whole section on resistance, and I was even more, and there's still that thing, sort of like taking somebody in without losing your own judgment, and sort of weighing your own internal judgment versus what they're doing, and not assuming that you're wrong or that they're, I'm having a really hard time. Maybe it's, and I'm confusing myself as I'm talking. So maybe I should stop.
I think those moments will happen, okay? When I was running the long training course, I would tell someone before they joined the course, this is the way, at some point or other, you're going to have trouble with me, okay? And it's all going to go wrong. We will have to go through that. And passive listening is a very powerful tool. That means it's got a downside to it, right? I mean, you know, you can have the drill and you're really good at using the drill, and, you know, you make the hole in the wall to put in the little screw that'll keep the spice rack in place, only a little screw, but then you go through the water pipe because you're not very good at using the drill. And you know, you got a mess because you weren't good at using that particular tool. So some of it, I think, is sort of going slow, but you know, the basic metaphor about passive listening, if we take it all in, and this is the basic metaphor in Gestalt therapy, we take it all in, we digest it, you know, we cut it up into small pieces, we chew it, our food, we take it all in, we digest it, assimilate it into our body. That which is poisonous, we will excrete away. So ideally, that's the approach. So we will truck out that which is not useful to us. But that sort of, and you know, it's a pretty heavy discussion today, but that goes back to Tamara's point. Well, you know, that's fine if someone's got all that strength to do that. But if someone doesn't have that strength to do that, then approach passive listening in a different way. And I would suggest you passive listening to that which is positive, and do not passive listen to that which is negative until you decide you want to do something different. Certainly in working with, you know, some people, and sometimes with people who are initially very good at passive listening, it's not good for them. And you mentioned the thing about perseverance strata. Yeah, someone who's involved in domestic violence, am I going to teach them passive listening? No way. I might teach it as a background, but you know, that is not a major tool at all. And I think it affects, you know, I said, you know, Fritz Perls was working with people who are established, blah, blah, blah. But when I first set up with Pellant, so was I. I was not working with prisoners anymore. I was working with young people on, what's it called, trust fund. I was working with trust fund kids. You know, they had the money to come to Italy for 3 or 6 months. It was trust fund kids. So, you know, these are large issues to look at. And there are certain groups I could imagine working with that teaching passive listening would, you know, be way down the line. It wouldn't be up front. Teach foster kids to passive listen? Only if I can turn it into a device that is powerfully protective for them. but otherwise, no. That's a group of people who, were forced to listen to stuff that was really bad for them. And that's where, I have some confidence in the methodology of tools. So there are no formulas here. And if someone says, well, I really like your work, but I don't like passive listening, I don't want to do it, that's fine. I teach it in other ways, and I never forget the truth line. We've only got that a little bit. So go slow with passive listening for sure. And if I took, a group of people who I didn't think passive listening was appropriate for, even maybe an organization within which there's a great deal of conflict, okay? And people don't trust it. But, passive listening comes way down the line. And the Pelham methodology there would be to teach the 7 levels of listening first, and the pendulum. And so it's almost in the background, and it's not sort of almost pounding passive listening the way I've been doing here. I've been doing it quite different. So, when you feel the confusion and stuff, that's gold. Really, really. And if we don't have that, we get awfully complacent. I don't want to go there. Okay, we've gone over a little bit. So we'll stop there for now. I'd like to come back to this on Wednesday, and I guess I'd like to say, the way we're bringing resistance to nourishing change back into Pelham is new and work in progress, okay? Yeah, definitely work in progress. And yeah, I'm Peter. I'm in England. And I think I spent a lot of the week in Washington, D.C. That's me. Yeah, do you want to go next, Cynthia?
Oh, I hit the wrong button, and I'm Cynthia. I'm in Kankakee, and thank you for, yeah, thank you for working with me through my confusion.
Okay. Just to say it, David Pelham taught me very clearly that if you don't have confusion and you don't have doubts in this field, you're probably a charlatan, okay? So, that's background. Mary?
I'm Mary in Rosarito Beach, Mexico.
Okay, we'll go up the coast. Tamara?
I'm Tamara in San Francisco.
Okay. Elizabeth?
She had to
Elizabeth's
leave.
not.
She had to leave early. She was hurting.
Yeah. Nikki?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nikki, Wimbledon, London. My head's so tired. This has been making me think so deeply. So thank you.
Okay, so I'm saying this thank you for coming. I'm just saying this to myself. I know I got really high in this session, so I'm going to hit a low, okay? Though I got to be a bit careful. And thank you, and I'll see you on Wednesday. Watch
Thank
this.
you.
Thanks.
Okay, bye.
All right, bye everyone. Bye.